You and it's not OnlyFans for you, it's only feet. Yeah.
Hey everybody, this is Eshan with Juno, and another segment of All Wyse Transformation, talking about self-care, spiritual practice, and mental health. Juno, thank you so much for participating in this interview. For folks who don't know, Juno, self-identifying witch, has their own organization, is working on healing, spiritual practices. So if you want more information, we'll definitely have connections or links to how to get connected with Juno. So Juno, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction, especially after I said some inappropriate things during during the early part of the process, and I didn't realize.
I should have warned you that I was gonna hit record, so that's on me.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to be here. I'm so glad to get to talk to you today. Thank you for having me.
So I'm trying something new, and so you're gonna sort of be my test subject. So
Love
one of
that.
the questions that I think I'm gonna start doing is asking about what are you curious about?
What am I curious about?
Yeah.
Um, well, how like I what I am most curious about will incite a political discussion. So I don't know if you want me to go there, but
Maybe just a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little
I'm
bit.
curious as to why they charged Luigi Maggioni with terrorism and they didn't do that to people that shoot up schools. That's what I'm curious about.
Mm.
That's what has been really causing my wheels to turn lately.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Like, why
good.
is he a terrorist and school shooters are not?
Mm, mm, hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna sit with that one because a part of me is like thinking like there's a mental health component to it, but I don't think that's cold-heartedly accurate.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, yeah. One thing that I'm curious about is AI, right? Like how AI is going to change writing, artistic licensure, like who really owns the art that's done on AI or with AI or yeah, I'm
So that's very interesting to me. And I'm a big proponent of using AI. You know that I have a background in technology. I used to be like a lead technician at a data security company. Um, but my thing with AI is like, well, actually, so if you use like certain programs like Midjourney, because you purchase the service with Midjourney, you actually own the rights to the product that you create. So
okay.
that's something that if you're interested in that part of it. But I love what I mean, I know that with everything there's like a spectrum, right? So there's like the people that abuse AI for artistic license and stuff like that, and then there's people that like use it kind of more appropriately. Um, I will say AI has really helped me with like growing my business in terms of creating documentation that might otherwise be very arduous to create,
Ooh,
like
okay.
intake documents and stuff like that.
Okay.
And um, I really appreciate how it helped me refine my mission statement for my organization. So, like, I think it's all in how you use the tool, right? Like,
Right.
that's the thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I've also been like trying to do some coaching of myself because as an individual who struggles with a learning issue with dyslexia, and so I'm thinking, yeah, this would be really helpful. And then I'm thinking like, but then who owns it, right? Like who like will have access to what I use? But I think it goes to your point about I think it depends on the platform you're using, right? And
Yes.
how that's being used, right? And the other thing I'm curious about, which I'm sort of breaking my own rules, is the idea about the black box about AI, where like all that information goes in, because it's like sifting through information that we don't know what it's sifting through, like ones and zeros and ones. It's just fascinating to me, just completely fascinating to me.
I mean, I get it. It is a very intriguing um, technology. Because also, then you kind of have to wonder. like at what point, because you're asking a program, or really what that is a server, right? Because it's where like all the information is housed somewhere. So you're asking a computer to compute new thoughts through
Mm,
compositing information that it's been given by the collective and
mm,
what it's capable of searching like searching rapidly. So I think like there's like at what point does AI become sentient, and does AI become sentient? And
mm,
it, and like what are the ethical components behind that, right? Like are we essentially making modern day slaves? Is that what this is? Or
yeah,
are we
yeah.
like does AI, does it already have sentience? Like there are so many questions that can come along with that.
Hmm. Huh. All right, it's gonna be for another little segment if you're because I do want to have you back again.
I
Uh,
would love that. Thank you already. Yes.
and so let's dive into it. So I'm curious, how would you describe well, number one, can you talk to us about your organization, what your organization is about, and the idea behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I will, do you want me to tell you like how I conceived of the
Yeah.
organization too? It's kind of like it's a funny tongue-in-cheek story. So, I was at the gym with one of my friends, and it was about 2 years ago now, and we were on the treadmills, and I was like feeling kind of exasperated by the idea of taxes because I, as a person who is both like mixed race and queer, I don't feel 100% represented or protected by our current government,
Mhm,
as it
mhm,
stands now. And that was a real problem for me. And I was like, why am I paying taxes when I don't even feel represented or protected? Like, this is ridiculous and unacceptable. And I was like, can I have like a fake nonprofit or something like Kim Kardashian has? You know, that bitch isn't doing anything productive. And um, when I say something out loud, I'm like 90% there on a decision anyway. So my friend who I was at the gym with, his name is Dan. He's a straight guy. He's like the most ally you'll ever meet. He's wonderful. I love him. Um, he was like, "You should do it," and I was like, "I'm gonna do it." And so I called a law firm like the next day, that specializes in opening nonprofits. If anyone is interested in opening a nonprofit, check out Chisholm Law Firm. I am in no way sponsored by them. I wish I was. They're a wonderful organization. They're so easy to work with, and they support you the whole way through the process. It takes most people uh, 5 years to become a nonprofit, to become a 501(c)(3),
oh,
and with their help, I did it in a year. So,
oh,
like, truly worth the investment. Um, that said, I called them and I was like, "Hey, I want to start a nonprofit." And they were like, "Okay, what do you want? Who do you want to help?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what this is supposed to be about." Um, and so I was like, "I want to help queer people access spirituality," and it just kind of like flew out of my mouth. And the lady on the other end goes, "That's a great idea."
mhm,
And I was in tech at the time, and I've always felt most rewarded by life when I'm doing like witchy things or like moon rituals or reading people's tarot cards or like all that spiritual stuff. And so, like her saying that again, like I say something out loud and I'm 90% there. So, like her little push to like, that's a great idea. I was like, that is a great idea. I was like, why don't I not be a liar and just turn my life into actually doing this and trying to make this happen for queer people? And that like one joke really turned and manifested into like this organization that I'm now running. Um,
mhm,
but the organization is called the House of H, and it's spelled Haus of H, and it is a nonprofit that focuses around both bringing um, spirituality to queer people in a way that they find meaningful, and in in a way that does not say that you can't believe whatever it is you believe. It's just saying like, hey, this is what you believe. Great. Now let's learn some other skills to kind of really hone in on like what the universe could possibly be saying to us. Or let's take these
mhm,
stories that we've read for all these years and um, try to look at them through a lens of acceptance, or like let's see what they could more be saying on an archetypal level, like
mhm,
that type of thing.
mhm.
So those kind of are the conversations I like to have. and I host 4 retreats a year. One is around gender nonconforming people, one is around the BIPOC population, and that retreat I'm very excited for in 2026. It is talking a lot about like the indigenous practices that a lot of spiritualities and religion are stemmed from, and also like how BIPOC people have adapted over time to integrate their like shamanic practices under the regime of whatever religion was uh, happening at the time.
Hmm.
And then I have a yoga teacher training coming up in August of 2025, and I
Nice.
have a thing called Witch Camp coming up in October of 2025. And that's like I like to say like learning the language of the universe because it's like talks about astrology and tarot and Reiki and like all this stuff.
Mhm.
And so if you are interested in like any of that, like I have a I have the space for you.
Yay! I love that. And I'm gonna have all that information down below so where folks could get more information about how to get connected with you or how to sort of participate in these sort of up and coming events, which I love the story about how you got your organization started. I feel like you sort of took this sort of easy road where most folks are just like, this got to be hard, this got to be like complicated. And, I didn't even know it took 5 years to start to get a nonprofit sort of official. Um,
Yeah, in most cases.
yeah, yeah. Which says a lot about your energy, right? To be able to sort of manifest only on 99%.
Well, I like to think that if something is in alignment for you or like your path, that it will happen with grace and ease. And
Mm,
I think that not to say that if things are challenging, you should shy away from them, but I think like if you make a really big dream of something and all of a sudden the things kind of just fall into place for it to happen, it's probably meant to happen, so you should follow that till you can't follow it anymore.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I just want to back up a little bit, and this is sort of like a trick question. Is it? No, that's coming out wrong. What does it mean to be a queer witch?
I think that witchcraft in general is like a connection to the energy because like we're all energy, right? We're all just vibration in at different resonances. So I think that witchcraft is the study of or like the inherent understanding of the energies that move through the universe
Mhm.
and like move through the cosmos and kind of how deity or spirit or whatever you understand that thing to be like the the communion with that thing through the world around you. That's what being a
Mhm.
witch is to me. And I
Mhm.
think that it really kind of ties in nicely with being queer because being queer, we're constantly asked to see how we do or don't fit in with the world around us.
Right, right,
And
right.
I think that in many instances, queer people are actually brought here to like teach lessons. And I don't mean that from like a heady ego perspective either, but I think like when you are inherently not the mold that the world was built for,
Mm,
I think that you have to then be here to teach, right? Because
right.
if you're not who it's meant to, if you're not here and like the world wasn't built for you, then it's your job to expand the world and it's your job to like make people understand. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to have been born to a family that's super supportive. And even though I'm gender nonconforming, I pass relatively easy for a cis male. And even though I am not white, I pass relatively easy for that. And so I have access to both of those privileges. And I think that when you are a person who has any form of privilege, it is your responsibility to figure out how to use your privilege as as a platform and pass it on to people that do not have that experience.
Hmm. I
So I
love
think
that.
that's why queerness and witchcraft like have this lovely double helix that works for them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to your comfort level, like where do you get the courage? Because it's a lot to have the spiritual practice and to be queer and to sort of be really sort of in a space where you can create other platforms like your organization, like your healing practice, right? Like I feel like that takes a lot of courage and comfortability and to your comfort level, like where do you think that comes from? Is that from practicing? Is that from just years of just life and getting to a point? Did you read a particular book that was just like, oh, this is what it means to sort of embody encouragement to be able to sort of do what you just described or practice or sort of yeah embodied what you just described. I'm curious what your thoughts on that.
I think it's a mix of things, and like I've dealt with a lot of struggle throughout my life, and I'm lucky enough, like I said, I come from a really supportive family. So I'm lucky enough that throughout literally every challenge I've had, my family has been there to like back me up. So I think like a real stable foundation is what has given me the power to do this. In addition to the fact that I'm just a person that if I see an issue with something, like I was always told that if you see an issue and you don't see a solution, like be the solution. So in many ways, that mentality mixed with like the firmness that I come from, or the firmament or the foundation that I come from, however you want to phrase that. I think those two things are really what gave me the strength to do it or the ambition to do it. And then uh, always just like as queer people, we're inherently outsiders, which I've like said just a moment ago. But I think that, we're forced to think about the world in a way that many people, the majority of the people in the world, don't have to. And so I think that the fact that I had a strong foundation and I was forced to think about viewing the world and experiencing the world differently allowed me to say, okay, well, I see these things. Now, how do I fix them? Or how do
Mhm.
I contribute? Not fix, because like fix is such a relative term and it's also such a term based in ego, but like, what can I do to contribute to a better space for queer people in the world? Because that is how I identify probably second, right after witch. It's like witch and queer. So, or like they're like tied for first, really. So, like, how do I make a better space for queer people in the world? The biggest problem that I felt queer people face in this world is our relationships to spirituality because it is the big three religions that are running the world at the moment are not the most supportive of queer people. And
Mhm.
in, and frequently they are actually like discriminatory against queer people. And my thought was like, if you're not going to ask me to sit at your table, I'll go build my own, and it'll be a really cool table. So like, fuck you guys, respectfully. Um,
I love that. Um, I'm gonna ask maybe a taboo question, and I'm curious about
I'm into taboo.
your thoughts and feelings. What do you think about the idea of cursing, right? Like there's sort of like this that if you're a healer or a witch, that you only sort of deal in the light, you only deal in healing and protection, and that practitioners should not be cursing other people, or practitioners should not be indulging in quote unquote the dark arts.
The left-handed path, as some people refer to it.
Right, the left hand, you said the left hand pass, right? Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious about like, do you think there can be a balance? Do you think that you have to choose only one? Do you, is it something, this is like, Eshan, what do you
No, so I
talking
think
about?
that I'm going to answer this in a way that is potentially esoteric, um, but will definitely give people something to think about. Um, it is my belief that if something did not have a purpose in existence, it would not exist.
Hmm.
So I think there is a time and a place for everything. I don't have to like it, I don't have to participate in it, but I think there's a function to it, and I think there's a, a place for it in this world. I don't, I generally don't hex people or anything like that or like curse people. It's not my vibe. Um, but I do acknowledge that there is definitely a space for it. And like, if for no other reason than for defensive purposes, like, I
Hmm.
think like, people learn taekwondo and karate, right? And they don't go around beating the shit out of people, but they know how to.
Right, right, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't actively go around hexing people. I know how to. I have books in my collection that talk about everything from like unaliving yourself first for the sake of a spell, um, to like consumption of certain like things like placenta. Like I have books that reference a lot of like weird things or like unconventional things, but I think you can't really understand the fullness and the wholeness of a picture
Mhm.
without looking at all of it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and for folks who don't know Juno, Juno is an awesome, lovely individual, beautiful soul. And so that question was completely just this because I've been seeing that on posts on like various witchy posts about folks talking about that. And I was just curious about your thoughts and opinions on that idea.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you. And I like that analogy about like taekwondo, right? Like being able to defend yourself. Like, it's there. It's a skill, but it's not something that you intentionally go out to like to do, right?
Yeah. And I will say that like any anything that I have cast that would be looked at as like baneful magic is always done in a way that is not necessarily like I am casting this upon this person or like I am wishing this bad thing on this person. I always phrase it in such a way that's like, may they experience the karma that they have attempted to pass on to me in a way that is swift and justified and like like swift and justified so that like it's basically like a fast forward karma spell. That's how I would phrase it.
Okay.
So I'm like, I have no like if they really had no ill will doing this to me, bless, then I hope their life is like sunshine and rainbows. But if they like did something with the intention of hurting me, I just hope they understand what they gave me or like what they dealt to me.
hmm 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 what's your philosophy on self-care? What does self-care look like to you or for you or what does that seem?
Um, Self-care is everything. Let's start with that. Um, it is so necessary. But I would say self-care to me looks like uh waking up without an alarm clock if I can.
Mm,
Self-care to me looks like not interacting with people until I'm ready if I have that ability to do so that day. Um, Self-care to me looks like a long shower. Self-care to me
mm,
looks like um forgiveness of all, but starting with myself. That's
mm.
what self-care looks like to me.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I sometimes go into these little dips where I do self-care and I do some of the stuff that you talk about. I love being able to wake up without an alarm. That is like the ideal.
Yeah,
Just
right?
just to start off the day and being like, you know what? I might stay in bed a little bit longer and odds are I'm probably like doom scrolling on my phone, but just having the option to be able to just lay there. Um,
Yeah. And I think like when I first wake up, if I wake up without my phone, like if my alarm isn't set, because that's what I used to set my alarm. Um, if I wake up without my phone, the first thing I do when I wake up is like I settle into my body.
hmm,
So I'm like after my eyes open and I'm like I'm here. I'm like, okay, how are we feeling? Just like a check-in and I'm like, do I have any aches right now? Like what's happening? Where's that coming from? So I have like a little conversation with myself, and then I begin the doom scrolling. And then I begin responding to the messages on like the dirty apps and stuff like that. But I give myself a minute first to like settle in.
what about a mental health practice? What is a mental health practice? Like your mental health, like how do you care for that? How do you sort of manage that in either a daily practice or occasional reminder? I know you do a lot of you work with a lot of sound. I don't know if you use that to help, or does that maybe fall under the spiritual practice question? So I'm curious about your mental health.
Well, I mean, like, if you're following the Hermetic principles, everything is mentalism. Everything's in your head. So,
Mm,
like, they're kind of very much one and the same, like the spiritual stuff and the mental health stuff, for me at least. So sometimes it is like sound, like the gong and the monochord, or other times it's just breath work. Like I love doing breath work. I'm a certified breathwork trauma release specialist. I trained with Awakened Breath under Ben Holt. Ben Holt is wonderful. Highly recommend him. Um, but yeah, it's breath work, it's sound, it's meditation. It's that's like my those are like kind of my big three.
hmm.
Sometimes mental health though even looks like playing a video game to me. Because
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
I just like not to say I don't want to think, but like I want to turn off from like all of this in a
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
just did like instead of doing that, I just will like unplug and I'll play a video game for like an hour or two sometimes. Just
Hmm.
because it's like a nice way to like suspend my consciousness into a different world where the stakes are nothing, literally, because you can always just hit reset.
Yeah.
Um, so I think like there's a spectrum when it comes to like mental health and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think
Oh,
oh, go ahead.
actually, a big one is not holding on to anything.
Ooh.
That's a big thing for my mental health. I cannot hold on to like other people's feelings, or if I'm feeling a certain type of way about a person, you're gonna know about it. Like, because I'm not holding on to it. So, I like being direct with people is a form of mental health for me.
Oh, I love that. I struggle with that. And like H- yeah, talk a little bit more about like how do you sort of like get to that mindset? How do you sort of implement that practice? I'm curious about not holding on to things because I'm I know that I do it, but I don't think I do it enough. And so I'm curious about if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, I have a master's in social work. I used to be a social worker. I was a social worker for 6 years. Um, but like not holding on to things for me, it looks a lot like if someone has upset me or like has done something where like I've taken like umbrage with it in some capacity, like if you hurt my feelings, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go back and hurt your feelings, but I'm gonna be very direct with you about how you hurt my feelings and why it hurt my feelings and why that's not acceptable. And then once I've done that, I have actively like released anything around it because now you know, and I have no reason to hold on to it.
Mhm.
So I just that's how I actively let things go. I let people know what they're making me feel.
Hmm. Hmm. Which 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 I think a lot of people carry that stuff internally, and it sort of festers or it sort of morphs into this other way of hurting you or hurting other people or projecting or just
So like for me, breath work is what helped me kind of develop that skill set. In addition to social work, breath work really helped because I say that like how you wash your physical body with like soap and water, or like most people wash their body with soap and water in some capacity. I think that like breath work essentially does that for your spirit body and your energy body.
mm,
So by doing like say like 40 hyperventilated breaths followed by a breath hold and then a release or something like that, that will help you move things that are stuck in your energy body through your process. And because what it does is it stimulates the vagus nerve and shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which shuts down the thinking mind, which allows you to kind of enter a trance like state without the use of substances, um, which then gives you kind of I don't know if you smoke pot or do edibles or anything like that. I do. And I know that when I do that, sometimes or many times, you'll have this moment of clarity where kind of like the world around you shuts down.
mm,
It's this kind of moment of like your brain is turned on, but not thinking. And you'll kind of experience these thoughts coming up, I can compare those two things in that way, where like when you do breath work and you are stimulating the vagus nerve, shutting down the prefrontal cortex, what that does is it gives your brain the space to go like, well, what's hanging around here that we don't like? And
Mm.
so when it processes things and things come up and you get thoughts or pictures in your brain, it allows you to move through those feelings and emotions. So, seeing what was getting stuck in my energy body and seeing the things that I had been holding on to that I didn't know I was holding on to, I was like, oh, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, fuck that. That's not healthy. This is being done for their sake, not mine. And like, I'm not doing that. I'm not responsible over someone else's journey, and I'm not here to help support someone who is not supporting me. And so that's why I decided that I was going to actively become very direct with people that were in some way violating my personal policies.
Ooh, ooh, I love boundaries. Boundaries. I love
Yeah.
it. For folks who don't know, what is breath work? And I know you sort of gave us a really good synapse of that a minute ago, but like how do you talk about breath work for somebody who doesn't necessarily know what it is?
So for breath work, I would say it is the what distinguishes breath work from everyday breathing is kind of like what distinguishes working out at the gym by yourself versus working out with a trainer. So like uh breath work is the conscious use of breath to access parts of yourself that are not always like switched online or like accessible to you, let's say. I mean, everything is always accessible to you, but like for some people, switching into altered states of consciousness is harder and more challenging, especially if you don't have a practice where you do it with some regularity. And so breathwork is a great way that is accessible to everyone because um, it's something that literally we all have lungs, we're all breathing. Like it's something that we can all do. Um, we can do it in varying degrees, obviously. Like I'm not saying that everyone's lungs are in the same condition and everyone is capable of doing everything. We have to do it in a way that is comfortable and also like meaningful for us. But I think that you know, that's the journey in essence. It's like finding out where your boundaries lie, where the struggle is, like what you're willing to challenge yourself on and what you're not. But
Mhm.
I think that generally breathwork is a practice that is similar to yoga, um, in that the more you do it, the more connection you find through it. And I mean it's connection with the one thing that unifies us all.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when I say that, I mean like think about fish, right? Do they know that they are in water? Because they're in a substance, right? So like humans, I don't think realize that we are in air. Like we're in air.
Yeah.
Granted, air might seem kind of cerebral as like a concept or like out there as like how can we be in air? But like fish don't know they're in water, so we can certainly be in air. So
Mhm.
like by doing diaphragmatic breathing and controlled breath and stuff like that, you're essentially actively participating with every like person in the environment around you. Like everyone in the world is participating in this one activity. So
Mhm.
when you create meaning around it, you have the ability to access things that you might not have accessed before.
Mhm. I like that concept that you're in air. I don't think I've heard that before in the sense of that you're not alone, right? Like I feel like at least for me, right? I sort of move through the world thinking like I'm sort of like this singular individual taking breath, just randomly just taking breath, and the idea is like we're all sort of taking a breath together, right? Like it may be off, and may be happening in Africa, but like we are all taking breath together, which I like that idea.
I mean, it's my belief that we're kind of all part of one amorphous organism. And I say that because, like, so I'm going to take you back to like creation stories for a second, like
Yes,
get real esoteric with it.
yes, please.
So, like, if you go to any of the the three major world religions and even like spiritualities that are not conventional, like you can I will use the like in the beginning there was nothing and then God said let there be light. There's that. So there was like a period of just darkness, nothingness. Out of darkness comes light and then like the structuring of that organism. So like if there was only God in the beginning, right? What did God have to create from? God had only itself to create from. So it is my belief that as we incarnate and as we're created and as we like choose to come into these physical human forms, we're really just like stewards and vessels for this divine energy that exists through all cultures. Like everyone understands that there is something larger than us. Um, and I think that ultimately when we say like, oh, this is what it looks like. It's just our ego trying to understand something that is ultimately uncomprehendable.
Mm.
And one of my favorite discussions around this to have is when I've spoken to atheists before, and they're like, well, you think that everyone's right, but I don't believe in anything, and you believe in something, so how do you make heads or tails of that? And I said, oh, well, I mean, you're also right. And they're like, well, how? And I said, well, if you think about it, if you were to take every atom, everything, right, and put it together, you would have no thing. There would be no thing there because there would be no one there to see it or comprehend it or experience it. So the collection of all things is nothing. So in nothing there is everything, and in everything there is nothing.
I love that. And I feel like it also goes with your practice of doing sound too, right? Because I feel like that's also a very sort of because I feel like talking about breath and talking about, air, that sort of expands and contracts a little bit. And I feel like sound also does that too. And I'm curious, what is healing through sound? Like what does that look like? And is it similar to breath work, or are they cousins of each other?
Well, I think whenever you work with energy, that essentially like it's a form of like sound healing or energy healing or something like that. It's all kind of one big balloon thing for me. My relationship to energy and magic and healing work and all that stuff. It's all just like one big thing, I guess. But essentially, if you like look into yoga and meditation and like meditative breathing and the heart, you'll see that like the heart actually generates an electromagnetic field around the body, um, approximately 6 feet in each direction. It's like kind of a thing you can.
Like the
That's Google.
like your aura, you mean, or is that different? Or
No, it's the same thing except, um, or like calling it an aura is kind of a little bit of like the woo-woo way to say it, but like your heart does generate a magnetic field. And the healthier your heart is, the more it pumps, the healthier it pumps, the healthier the field is. Um, so I think that with breath work, you clean out that energetic field, and with doing something like a gong or a monochord, like when you're in such close proximity to sounds like that happening, it can't help but disrupt the field that you are within or that you are generating. And so the disruption of that field can also cause things to move to the surface and stuff like that. So it's all just different ways of cleansing and moving things through the energy body in a way that we can understand it and like that we can start to learn to speak the language that is like not been taught to us.
mm, mm, hmm. Yeah. Um, I know that
I'm sorry that it gets so cerebral and heady sometimes because sometimes
no,
I don't
no.
think anyone even knows what I'm talking about anymore because it's like so I feel like it's very out there, but at the same time, I think when I've heard people say things and I don't get it, and there's like, but I can feel an inherent level of truth to it, I'm just like, I don't know what they're saying yet, but it'll open up eventually. I know it's gonna happen. So like when I studied Kabbalah, for example, that was like I did not get it at first, but I was like, I need to keep listening to this because I know that like there's truth in it because I can feel it when I hear it.
Which is interesting because a lot of the things I've been talking to some of my clients about is this idea that for the most part, therapy is really heady, right? It's a very sort of specifically in a Western sense where we're trying to conceptualize things, we're trying to put things in boxes, we're comp, comp I can't.
Compartmentalizing.
Thank you. We're trying to do that. Um, and and we're not really paying attention to our body, right? I think a lot of the stuff that you sort of mentioned, at least most of them, is very sort of somatic, very sort of um like you sort of have to be in your body. And
Yeah.
this idea that you know something is right before you could sort of articulate it or conceptualize it um, feels very right to me in the sense of I feel like we're very emotional beings. We're very sort of intuitive when we move through the world in the sense like, oh, this person, there's something about this person that doesn't vibe right with me, or there's something about this person that just this is a little off. Or it feels really good. Like, oh, there's not necessarily a spark, but there's like a thing that's drawing us together.
Magnetism, like a vibe.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm a big believer that our body is able to intuitively know something once it's sort of presented to us. And if it's sitting in a way that's like I know this, but I don't know how to put it into words, right? It's like the body's way of trying to remember, or
Yeah.
the body's way of trying to digest the information so that your mind can sort of process it. Because we spend a lot of time in our head. At least I know I do, right? Like trying to sort of like, or what's the next project, or the thing I need to get done. I need to pay my taxes, and so I spend a lot of time in my head, and so the idea of practicing something that slows you down, the idea of practicing something that puts you in your body, the idea of like reading information that you may not know, but like it just resonates with you. It's very intuitive, and I don't know if people feel comfortable enough to trust that, like to trust that intuitive aspect of their being.
So that's kind of like we know that my organization started as a joke. We covered that earlier. But I think like that's a large portion of the work that I want to do with people because in order to get to the point where you can trust your instincts and you can like listen to the universe as it's being presented to you, like it requires a certain amount of feeling safe in your body, right? And that's like one of the benefits of talk therapy and stuff like that. Uh, like having been a social worker before, I've I've treated people with talk therapy, and then I've done like the somatic type of healing work. And I think the marriage of the two is really where it's at because you have to first teach people how to or not teach people, but you have to like have people bring themselves to a place where they understand um like personal integrity and like advocating for themselves and all of like these other kind of daily life skills type stuff and also healthy communication patterns. But in order to even get there, you just have to feel safe being you in the world and saying like I can show up as me and it's okay. Like no matter what the day is going to look like, just because I'm me, it's going to be okay. And I think that once you can get people in in that region, even if they're not saying it in like that level of empowered way, even if they're just saying it like I'm good being me, like you know what I mean, like just feeling safe in your skin, that's the first step, and then comes the intuition and the somatic kind of techniques. And sometimes we can use things like sound to warm people up to the idea of like talk therapy and stuff like that. But I think that they work really well as a team, the two approaches to mental health.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm sort of late to the game to when it comes to sort of somatic stuff. I feel like I've really sort of stuck to the sort of Western idea about healing and the sort of Western approach of healing through talk therapy. And there are different modalities of different ways of implementing healing and being able to find a way to bridge those two. I think is luck, right? Like to be able to have gone through school social work and then sort of get into sort of your spiritual witchy practice, and then it's sort of matching up. I think that says a lot, right? Of one, I think sort of trusting your path. I think two, of sort of really sort of just being in tune, or just being aware, right?
Well, I think like I've always been witchy, like always for always. Um, I remember like when I was like 7 or something, I was like a really little kid. I was like, Mom, can I read tarot cards? And she was like, ah, no, like absolutely not. And then like fast forward to the 90s when things were fun and the movie The Craft came out and I loved that movie.
What was it?
And
The craft you said?
yeah, The Craft. Do you
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
that movie at all?
yeah, yeah,
It was so good.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I was like fascinated by it. I was like, oh, like these like high school girls, which were in their 30s, by the way. Like I still can't get over how we cast like 20 and 30-year-olds to play high schoolers, but whatever. Um, we were like, I'm sorry, Nev Campbell is not in a high school. She wasn't in Scream and she wasn't in The Craft. So, but love her. Um, but so that year, my cousin gave me a witchcraft book, and it was called Teen Witch. It was by Silver Ravenwolf. I still remember the name of it. I
Yeah.
don't have the book anymore. It was one that I gave to someone else. Um, but I remember reading that and being like, oh, this is the coolest thing. And that was my first exposure to kind of like deity worship outside of the traditional Roman Catholic pantheon.
Hmm.
Um, and that was when I decided I was going to work with like Aphrodite for a little bit because also I was like, wait. So in high school, I was not very popular, go figure, like a queer kid in the 90s that was like a little chubby. Yeah, not the most. I didn't win Homecoming King or Queen for that matter. I bet I would today though. But
Yeah, yeah.
so I like I was not the cool kid in high school. But I think that like that was kind of my reason for wanting to connect with Aphrodite because I was like, well, what better way to get people to like you than to work with the goddess of love, right? Um, so even though I was like a little bit late to the game with that, and uh I had to get confirmed, I think. So my mom was like, you have to stop doing this because you have to get confirmed. And my uncle is a priest. So he was also like, yeah, you have to put this stuff down. And I was always a very obedient child. Um, so I was like, okay, whatever. Um, and then fast forward again, and I was like 20 or 21, and I was working at Whole Foods Market in the whole body section, and I met a couple of people that were like, "Oh yeah, we're witches," and I was like, "Oh my God, that's like a thing! I completely forgot about that." And so I was like, "Again, I want to read tarot cards," and so I immersed myself in reading tarot. I dedicated myself to the divine and or like what my relationship with the divine was at the time. That has evolved a lot over time, but I just recommitted myself in a different way.
Mhm.
Because I don't really identify with the whole like Catholic narrative. I have many issues with their not necessarily their well, yeah. I feel like they've manipulated a lot of the storyline and the teachings in a way that fits a narrative that is uh very disempowering to people because it is easier to keep people weak when they are separate and splintered. And I was trying to be as diplomatic as I said that as possible. Um, but and then I started studying tarot, and then tarot led to like my my understanding of the world around me, and later as a social worker, I still like never stopped looking for the interconnectivity of it all.
Mhm.
And I think like I don't want to say like there's one like ultimate truth because I think like that is a very narrow way to experience existence. But I do think that there is something bigger than all of us that none of us are truly capable of comprehending with our human brains because it's just like you can't point at it. You can experience it or you can like lightly experience it, but you can't point at it because I think this realm of existence is very specifically like the experience of duality and the experience of not living in oneness, which I think the the dual experience or like the separation or the illusion of separation is specific to this plane of existence. So I think like when we are not in physical form, uh it's a more like unified sense of consciousness and there's a lot more like immediacy to how things
Mhm.
happen.
Mhm.
So I think we incarnate to experience separation and we incarnate to forget the sense of oneness and stuff like that. And I think the whole journey of this existence, this physical corporeal form, I think that that whole journey is like the kind of quest for understanding oneness through separation
Mm.
because you don't know what you are till you know what you're not type thing.
Mm.
So I
Mhm.
think that's kind of the point of being here.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that you phrase that because I think within the mental health world or sort of in mental health therapy, there's this idea about duality or that two things can exist, right? You can be angry at somebody and still love them, right? You could be disappointed at something and still hopeful, right? And so this idea that even within regular day trying to live life and 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 not saying that it has to be one way and maybe for some people it does, but I agree with you. I think finding not necessarily that balance, because I don't really think balance is a really healthy thing, because everything is a little off kilter. But this idea about being able to see the bigger picture, because I think like when you're sort of narrow focused or narrow minded or egocentric or sort of just the ego or the sort of narcissistic, it really sort of focuses on one thing, and you can't really see outside of that or really can't have conceptions or feelings outside of that. Like it has to be this. And then if you're not succeeding in that sort of narrow view for whatever reason, you start feeling angry, you start feeling resentful, you just start feeling like all these sort of negative feelings. And then once you sort of let go of that perfectionism, right? Because I think we all want to be, we all sort of want to present ourselves in a way that's ideal. Like I don't want any spinach between my teeth. I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? Like I want to like it's like all of these things that we sort of chase to make us feel validated. And this idea of yours, or not yours, but I think you're really saying it really beautifully. Like duality is about seeing it from a different perspective, of how life is going for you and how you're moving through the world. Because if you're holding on to something that's no longer serving you, if you're holding on to or viewing something in a very narrow view, um, that could cause more heartache. And maybe that's a generalization, and maybe because like I also feel like there isn't just one answer, right? I feel there's multiple answers, right? Like so I'm.
I mean, I think with I agree with what you're saying, by the way. I think that like because I think we're all kind of this amorphous organism that could otherwise be known as divinity, like I think that we are all just whatever divinity is attempting to experience and understand itself. So that's why there are all these different experiences that happen on Earth. That's why there are all these different skin shades that are on Earth. There's all these different like belief structures. There's all this different stuff. Um, and I think that all of it is valid. And I think that when one voice is the predominant voice and then says these other opinions aren't valid, that's when there's a problem. And I think that that's where like then exploration and discussions need to happen. And that's kind of, I mean, without knowing at the time, that's why I started my organization because I think that like it's really important that we have conversations around spirituality and conversations about like what this is or like what this experience is that we're having because I think generally speaking most people agree that there is something that happens after you end your existence here,
Mhm.
whether that be positive or negative. Um, that's your journey, let's say. But I think that, you know, because the spirit is in the body, like, or actually the body is in the spirit, but like let's not really go there. That's like a real heady conversation. But because the body houses a component of the spirit, um, to cut somebody off from their spiritual practice or their ability to practice their spirituality because of who and how they love, like that's discrimination. And that's not okay. Like you're saying that your human experience is less valid because I don't agree with how you participate with this human experience. And like
Mhm.
you're not God. So who are you to say? Well, I
Mhm.
mean, I guess well, let's not say you're not God because technically if we all house a spark of the divine in us, I guess we are all God in a way,
Yeah.
but not in the same sense of like ego God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
like this
I
one
think,
large governing body type God. Not that.
well, interesting that you say that. I feel like, at least sort of like the way I sort of conceptualize divinity is that I think we're all little sparks that come out of the divinity to sort of, I think you were sort of saying this to experience life. And it's also how the divinity experience life, if I'm
Yeah,
if I'm
exactly.
if I'm repeating myself. And so when we sort of go back, we're providing a different experience, a different perspective of individuals who are possibly, closed-minded, or individuals who are racist, individuals who are, living with depression, whatever that looks like. Um, and then when we go back, like the higher divinity is able to sort of, I don't know what they do with that information once that information is collected. But I do believe that we are, extensions of the divinity that's experiencing life, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious about your thoughts and opinions. Science, is science a form of witchy magic?
Yes and no. And I will explain both. I think that science is the like comprehension and the like math brain portion of magic. Like it is the need to understand the magic that exists. Whereas I think
Mm,
that magic or like the spiritual component of magic is tied into faith. So it's the need to not understand how it happens. Just that like through a
mm,
series of actions, I can cause a reaction and I don't need to
mm,
understand it. So like I will give you an example of that. Like do I understand how the electricity is getting to my computer right now and like how I am being generated on your screen right now? Not really. Like, sort of, I understand it. I know there's, like, I could go read a manual and understand it, and like the information is out there, but I don't necessarily like. It's magic to me. This might as well be magic.
No, I agree. Anytime you could do like any program ones and zeros and then have this happen, I'm like, oh, that's very magic.
Right? And so I think that science has proven things that people conceptualized as magic and was originally received by the people as magic. Um, but if you think about it, like the study of the stars, like there is a very magical component to it and there's a very scientific component to it. Like astrology and astronomy, one is the study of the energy associated with the constellations and one is the study of the science associated with the constellations. Like if you
Mm,
can hybridize the two, I'm sure there's like a very beautiful practice around that, but some people you usually just fall on one side or the other of how you participate with that system.
mm, yeah, 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 and sort of like that alchemy of it, right? Like there's sort of like this fine line of for instance, the solar eclipse, this past this year. Can't believe I was close to saying this past year, but pretty soon is going to be this past
Yeah.
year. Um, I had the privilege and the chance to sort of observe that, and a lot of people where I was like this park area. For folks who don't know, I live in Vermont, and folks had like their telescopes and like their telescopes connected to their phones so they could sort of track down the exact moment, the exact minute of each time the moon would sort of move. And that's very sciencey to me. And like here I am feeling like I'm experiencing something very spiritual, that just doesn't have words to, but yet we have like, these technologies to be able to quantify that to a certain degree, which I find very magical to be able to know that that sequences of events like this is going to happen at this time, this location, and I'm like, wow, that's very magical.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like, so if you were to now take something like the hours of like a day, right? And like tracking this one thing, whether that be a constellation, a planet, and a planetary happening, and then you were to combine that with intention, like who's to say what could or couldn't happen?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Because
Huh.
like intention is everything, right?
Yes, yes.
It's both everything and nothing because it is everything, it is nothing.
It's so true.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get ready to wind down. I just got a couple more questions. And so you
Yeah.
mentioned the
I'm
crowd.
sorry I'm like such a chatty one. You get
No,
me going. And
no, I love it.
fun.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. And I do want to have you back because I feel like I feel like when you were sort of describing your childhood and sort of like can I do tarot, I feel like I really resonated with that because I remember I don't remember how old I was collecting seashells, collecting rocks, sort of like flowers, herbs, and and sort of putting them. At the time, I didn't have the language, putting them on an altar, um,
Hmm.
or just a sort of an area in my room. And my mom was like, "What's this junk doing here?" I'm like, I don't know. And she was like, "Are you practicing black magic?" I'm like, "What? What do you mean practicing black magic? No, I really like this." And I felt a call to like have like water there, and I felt like a call to have a rock there, and a rock in a particular place on the altar. And again, I didn't have the language for the word altar or the language of what I was doing. And it wasn't until much later I was like, oh, I was intuitively making an altar, right?
Yeah.
And just that alone, it was like, oh, was I witchy to begin with and just didn't know it?
Yeah. I would venture to say yes. For whatever it's worth. I would venture to say yes.
So, question, I'm curious, like, do you think there's a difference about individuals who are sort of natural? I don't know if that's a right word to use.
Oh, like a what's that called? Like a natural witch, like a born witch, like they have
Yeah, I
their
feel
lineage.
yeah, I feel weird saying that because that sounds very elitist almost.
So
Kind of.
I could talk for over an hour about this topic alone. Um, but I'm not going to. I'm going to like be as concise as possible. I think that um in the 90s there was a real call to that as like um if you were initiated, how you had to be initiated. There was a very big conversation around like what school were you like kind of
Mm,
educated in of magic, but
mm,
a lot of people don't know the difference between like Gardnerian, Rosicrucian, the Golden Dawn. Like they don't like that's not a lot of common knowledge at this point. And I think that back then that was a large part of the discussion. And now I think generally because there's such a detachment from who we are and our sovereignty as people, because I mean, depending on how you want to really like go with that, but I can say that like I think many people are feeling detached from themselves and from their bodies and from the experience they're having here. I think there's this large kind of like floating thing that is happening for a lot of people where they don't feel grounded in their own realities and they don't feel safe in their realities.
mm,
And so I think that they're feeling called to like spirituality and witchcraft and paganism right now, because there's like just such a clear relation to like how you connect in that way. And so I think that really, though those schools of thought and being educated in like what that all means, I think that we're really moving towards like a shamanistic kind of existence in the spiritual practices now. I think it's more about like how you relate to the elements around you and stuff like that.
Mm,
But I
mm,
do think there's a lot to be learned from like some of the things I listed, like the Rosicrucians and the Golden Dawn and all that. I think there's a lot that can be learned from that, just from even understanding like, oh, like they set up this system, this was their belief structure, and like, but where did they get that from? And so then like I'm always a person where I'm like, but where did it come from?
yeah, yeah.
Like where did it come from? I remember being little and in church because I like when I was, you know, when you're like getting, I don't know, you went to like the whole Catholic process, right? You did that whole thing.
Protestant.
Okay. So did you do like communion and all that?
I don't remember. I think I did, but I don't remember.
Okay, so I remember being in like second grade and sitting in church and like getting ready for communion and like learning that whole thing and being like, what is happening in that cup up there? Like, what is happening with those wafers? Like, what is that? What's happening up there? And then, like, later in life, when I was looking this stuff up, I was like, well, where did that ritual come from and why that? And so that was kind of in high school what spurred me to look for something different. Like, in addition to being interested in witchcraft and like the movie The Craft, when I first was reading books about witchcraft, I was like, wait, this is like the Catholic Church does this. Like what's happening here? And then I was like, but this is older than the church. And so then it became a quest that has always kind of sat in me of like, what's the thing behind it all? Like where does it all come from?
Hmm.
And I think that because I've always been like really a quester, like that it just kind of like has always stayed with me and I've kind of always looked for the through line as a result.
Hmm. Yeah, I do feel like there is value in tradition. I think either in sort of witchcraft or Yoruba or Ifa or voodoo or like I do feel like there is value in that and being mindful that sometimes some individuals can have their ego monopolize or get in the way of healing. But I do agree with you. I feel like there is sort of this sense of something that sort of naturally you're called to. Like it's like you're just curious about why is this working the way that it is, and why are we doing the way that we're doing things? And you're right, very much so. The Catholic, you know, Christian, they do take on sort of like these sort of paganism, sort of traditional aspects that they're sort of masked over to be able to make it more palatable. Because I think Christianity, any of the Abraham religions, I think they sort of make ancestor worship, make venerating the earth um, um, palatable and like presentable in a way that I don't know if I'm making sense. It just it's them versus us, right? It becomes like, oh, you don't want to be practicing that. Let's practice this because this
Yeah.
this is more palatable. This is more sanitized, right?
Well, my issue with that is that I don't actually, I think like it's a way of kind of businessifying spirituality because
Mm,
ultimately like
mm,
all you need for any type of spiritual practice is yourself. That's literally all you need. Like everything else, like the chalices and the bread and the wands and the knives and like whatever it is you believe in, the candles, like all of that is triggering a form of self-hypnosis in an attempt to shift your reality, your internal reality, to create an outcome.
yeah,
And I think by doing something like what the Catholic Church has done, or like anything that reports back to the Vatican, is it has taken the spiritual equity or the spiritual empowerment out of the hands of the people to say like we're the ones that that give this to you, when really that's not how that works.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like anyone can access divinity and anyone can have a relationship with the divine. You don't need to like confess your sins to a human. The concept of sin is really even quite debatable in my opinion. Because I think like that's like your attempt to like learn lessons and like process karma and stuff like that. I think that that's like a whole different conversation. But I think
Yeah, yeah, which sparks this in me, which I haven't really fleshed out. Another controversial question I'm going to ask, and we don't have to like fully finish this, but I'm curious about your concept of, do you feel, and this is sort of my sense, and I'm curious, like I sometimes feel, and again, I'm still working this thought out, um, that to a certain degree, Christianity or most, if not all, the Abraham religions are sort of very death cultish. Like it's like you are going to get all of your good stuff once you die. Like you're going to get the benefits and you're going to reap everything once you're dead.
well,
And I feel like witchy, like they're all about like being in the moment, like it's sort of finding your own spiritual practice. It's about like, how do I be in my body? How do I be in my breath? And like Christianity, and again, I might I might be causing a storm here, but I feel like Christianity is so focused on the future. It's so focused on um the tomorrow, and not maybe not so much like actual Jesus's teachings, but I do feel like Christianity is a death cult. And and I'm just
well,
curious what your
the
thoughts
two things
are.
to that. I think that like the teachings of Jesus are not really found in the Bible. I don't think that like let's just I'm gonna put that down and leave that there and just whoever wants to can look it up or talk to me somewhere else. I don't know what to tell you. But I think that it is like as you put it, like there's a death cult aspect to it, but I think also there is an aspect of like you'll get all the great things once you die as long as you listen to how we tell you to live your life here.
Yes.
That's the part that I don't agree with
Yes.
because I think
Yes.
that I don't want to say like all we have is autonomy, but really like all that we in our daily life have is autonomy and like and the ability to make decisions for our bodies
Right.
and the only thing we have is like how we relate to the world around us and to just so easily hand that over to an organization because we were told that that's what happens or because that's just what we do or that's
Right.
just tradition
Right.
like that's not enough of an answer for me.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'm a grown up. You have to speak to me like one. I'm not just entertain. I'm not willing to take just because as as an explanation for anything.
Right. Which I feel, to a certain degree, some people want to be told what to do. So
And
some
that's fine.
some people want to be led by somebody else, right? Like I completely agree with you. Let me figure this out on my own. Like let me figure out if this makes sense to me or if I can incorporate this in my life and to a certain degree, yeah, I'm very curious. I'm like, why are we doing this? How does this why?
Yeah, exactly. I feel very similar. And I just that was again like I didn't realize at the time, but reasons like this and conversations like this are why I started my organization. Like I think that this has always been a passion of mine, like spirituality and like asking the questions that there are no real answers to. Um, but I think like the just the desire to question has always been there. And I think until just recently, I wasn't really strong enough as a person
Mm,
to be able to have these kind of dialogues with people that actively disagree with me or like I wasn't comfortable taking up a space where I knew that there might come criticism and stuff like that.
mhm,
And I think once I really was like, yeah, I'm doing this, like whatever. Like once that transition happened, that's when um I stepped into this more fully and was able to say like, yeah, this is my belief structure. And I, it's the weirdest thing. So growing up Catholic, I experienced a lot of trauma around the concept of like, I remember when I first was like, I don't believe in God, or like, I don't believe in the Catholic, like the Catholic God, version of God. Um, I remember feeling like, oh, like I meant it, but I felt like I had to look over my shoulder in some capacity, or like I was about to be smited or something. And I think that like when that happened, and I was like authentically fearful of an entity that I did not believe in, that was like something that made me like sit still for a minute and go like, I gotta figure this out. And like that was when I really started to examine what I as a person believed and where these beliefs came from. And like I had to ask myself questions like, do I believe this, or was I conditioned to believe this by tradition and my family and the
Mm,
people I love? And like,
mm,
but like, where does it sit in my body, and do I actually believe in it, or do I just like love the people that taught it to me so much that I accepted it as reality?
mm.
And those are only answers that people can come up with for themselves. I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe.
Yeah, yeah. So as we're winding down, I'm curious about how would you inform or teach or guide somebody who is interested in witchcraft? Like where, like, is there like a go-to book that you have, like you always like, oh, this is a good book to read? I know there's YouTube, there's like so much you could do online, like TikTok and all all of that. I'm curious about if you were to give a 101 on how to get started in a particular witchy practice, like what's some feedback you would give?
So there are two options for that. Well, there are a million options for that, but there are two I'm going to highlight. One would be my retreat in October of 2025, because it's really like an immersion weekend on all of that stuff. Like you learn tarot, you learn astrology, you become Reiki certified. There's like all of that there. It's like a beginner's course to witchcraft in many ways. Um, so like if I were to stay, I have a stellium in my fourth house. You would know what that meant, if you
Which I
came.
don't.
Yeah.
But if you
Um,
go to this workshop, you will.
yeah, my retreat. So there's that. Um, but other than that, I would recommend the Kabbalion, which is like an excellent book. Um,
Could you spell
I
that?
will, yeah,
Okay.
Kaballion, I believe.
Okay.
I believe that's it. If you type in Hermeticism, you'll actually find it really easily. Um, and so the concepts behind this book was published like, or the information that this book was later like published with was like from Egypt. It's like a very old, these concepts are very old. Um, and there are seven Hermetic principles, and I think once you familiarize yourself with them, you will see them in every spiritual tradition. Um, and so like exploring that information, I welcome people to do, because from that, once you experience that and like understand that, um, it you can then make your own practice. You can figure out what kind of speaks for you, and like what sings to your song, or like how to best do that.
Hmm. I love
So I think
that.
the Kabbalion, although like I will say there are certain aspects of it that today might be seen as problematic, because they talk about like gendering things and like there being two genders and stuff like that. Um, there is actually oh wait, I might have it like right here actually. We know I'm not gonna stand up, but like if I have it right here, it would be great. I don't.
It's
But
fine.
there's another,
Well, if you remember, just shoot me a quick little text, and I'll put it in the one of the
it's
resources in the
called
descriptions.
The Psychic Witch, and it's by Matt Aram.
Uh,
And he is he's a practicing hermeticist, and he's a witch, but he's based in hermeticism. So if you were to read that, that's actually a really lovely uh book that gives you exercises to work through that are focused on like principles, the principles of like both Hermeticism and witchcraft. So it's a really great learning book, and it's also a great book for people that have a lot of experience because it can give you words for things and it can give you like concepts and ways to ground them.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I really appreciate you giving your time to explain your journey and your practice and your organization and your up and coming retreat. Um,
Thank you.
and so I'll have all that information down below for folks who want to participate and support you in any way. Thank you, Juno.
Thank you. It's been a complete joy, Esha, and I can't wait to see you again.
Yay!